Hey everyone, welcome to the latest Courageous Conversation. And with me, I have got Linda Rudd, who sits on the board of the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales with me, and so much more. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you, Leanne.
Lovely to see you. So tell everybody what your current role is.
So I'm currently partner and national head of asset management services at Knight Frank Australia. So we oversee the delivery of property management, facilities management and accounting services to our clients that can range from institutional investors to private investors in property. And that's across all asset classes, so commercial, office, retail and industrial logistics.
Okay. And you've got something in the order of like 400 people reporting to you?
I do. Look, we are a resource-heavy business, but certainly when it comes to servicing property, we do that with some fantastic team members and personnel across Australia.
Wow. And that's about half of the Knight Frank workforce that are in your team, right?
Yeah, it is. So we're about a workforce across Knight Frank of 800 people in every major city. So asset management services, we call it AMS for short. But yeah, we represent about 50% of the business.
How on earth do you manage a team that big? Particularly, I know that you work remotely a lot of the time. How on earth are you managing that, and how's everything changed since the pandemic?
Yeah, look, first of all, I have a fantastic team, and that includes my senior leadership team. So I have a partner and head of state in each of the states, and they largely localise our service. So Knight Frank is a global company, but we always provide localised services. So even in Australia, whilst yes, we're a national and across Australia, it really is about how we deliver services to each of those states and certainly regions within those states. And that really comes down to having a really good national executive team that supports the delivery. And also, we one of our strengths and kind of market leading selling points is our systems and platforms. So we manage property. I think we've got something like 7.5 million square metres under management, and we do that with the 400 people, but by providing them a really strong support network so that they can do their jobs really well. And that includes across systems, process, procedures, and just in terms of coaching and guidance. And people are our number one priority. I know probably a lot of groups say that, but that truly is our focus at Knight Frank.
Yeah, right. Do you know everybody's names?
I know most people's names actually, and I know what properties they're allocated to and what clients they work with. And so when I used to be able to get around to travel to the States, I'd be able to have conversations directly with the team, and I love hearing from them and hearing their different insights and the different properties that they manage. And we've got actually, even though it's a team of 400, it really does feel quite a small team, and we're all very connected. And it's funny to say that because you wouldn't really think that just I guess by sheer number wise, but no, we are quite a small team, and we're all looking out for each other, which is actually really quite special.
That's really nice. So how did you get to where you are? Where did you start your real estate career?
Well, it's funny. I remember in year 12 and you finish your HSC and everyone sort of seemed to know what they wanted to do and go. I'd be moving directly into university, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And I thought, well, I haven't really been out in the world technically. School is a bit of a bubble in some respects. So I agreed with my family that I would take a kind of gap year, but go and work in the Sydney CBD and then really get a feel for perhaps where I wanted to build a career. I was fortunate to take up a role with an architecture firm, and they also did tenant rep and advisory. And so I was just doing reception and sitting on the front desk, and there was some agents that
all
used
of
to
the
come
best
through.
People started at reception.
Yeah, and it's one of it gives you such a good insight into the people visiting a company. And so there was given we were responding to briefs, certainly the operator at the time was responding to briefs. I got to meet quite a few commercial real estate agents, and just by chatting to them and understanding what our team did in the tenant rep side, it really kind of heightened my interest in property property. So true to my word, after a year, I sat down with my dad, who's been a fantastic guiding kind of mentor to me.
That's nice.
We did a page turn, and we both ended up on the property economics degree, and I could study at Correspondence, so I could still work as well. And I was living in the Blue Mountains, so I caught the train in, which took an hour each way, and hence I had 2 hours of study I could read per day. And I think then really correspondence learning was like sending you a bunch of textbooks and a whole thick binder of information and giving it to you to read.
It was hard. I did a lot. Yeah, I did a lot of study by correspondence, and it was not easy. You've got to be very disciplined, and you've got to be a good reader.
Yeah, and so I say I'm very disciplined. At times I'm not, but I do enjoy my reading. So, so I did that for about 3 years,
Wow.
and then I finished in 4 years, but I think it was about a year. It might have been 2 years before I finished the degree. I decided to go into a commercial agency property group, and so I started with CBRE, and again took a kind of property administration role in their property management team at one of Sydney's A-grade assets here in the CBD. But I had in my mind I was actually going to go and go and pursue valuation. But I guess
that was my first qualification, valuation. Do you believe it? Yeah. So not me, but anyway.
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, I even now working with students in our Knight Frank student program, quite a few of them pursue valuation as a start without necessarily kind of having exposure to the wider gambit of commercial property. So I was very fortunate to have some fantastic operators that I work with, and really good boss at that time that said, I don't think you'll be suited to valuation, and why don't you pursue a career in property management? And I guess that kind of was that was it from there. And I stayed with CBRE in Sydney for 4 years, and then I moved to London for just under 5 years with CBRE.
Wow.
And then I relocated back to Sydney in 2012 and took a couple of months off, which I always recommend. I had 3 months off, and it actually went very quickly, but I can't remember the last time I would have had that much time off. So then
you took 3 months off before you actually got another job?
Correct. Yeah, I did. And then I actually then caught up with some previous team members I used to work with at CBRE, being Stephen Ellis and a gentleman called Aaron McGee. So they were at CBRE and they'd moved to Knight Frank. And so they gave me a pretty good opportunity and a very good sell on Knight Frank. And I guess the rest is kind of history. And here I am leading the team across asset management services, which I'm very proud to do.
Yeah, so you should be. It's an amazing role. And there's not that many women in leadership. Particularly in commercial real estate. So, and you also sit on the board of Knight Frank. How's that?
Yeah, look, I think first of all, in terms of women in commercial real estate, I think, it applies to a lot of other industries as well. But I suppose where we can make change in our roles is in real estate. And I think I certainly feel that women that are going to be the future leaders of both Knight Frank and businesses across commercial real estate do want to see someone in that position. So it gives them a sense of, I guess, opportunity, and that, someone of their gender or even across a range of different factors can actually be a senior leader in a commercial real estate business or any other business. So for me, I worked in London with some very strong women who were kind of my mentors and really coached me around. But also I've had the fortune of working with a lot of great men who have just been super supportive. And I think when it comes to it, is if you work hard and you do a really good job, you do get noticed, and then you do get supported. And if that's not the case, then I wouldn't be sticking around wherever you are, because hard work and good work should always be rewarded.
That's really good advice, actually.
Yeah, and I think, look, there's still so much more we could do, and I'm so amazed to see such strong, amazing, intelligent women coming through the business, even at Knight Frank or even in the industry, and I'm really confident about the future. And I think typically there's always a bit of a tipping point in terms of seeing commercial real estate as an industry. I didn't know it existed before I had exposure to it. And it was actually through, again, my conversations, which, in hindsight were probably largely male conversations, and them encouraging me to get involved. And certainly my male bosses that I had originally at CBRE, and then certainly even at Knight Frank. So I guess, again, it's the hard work and kind of doing a really good job that gets you noticed and people want you on their team. So And in terms of the Knight Frank's Holdings board, look, we had a change in CEO about 12 months ago, and certainly Rod Lever came into the business and certainly comes from a background which is about diversity, and he's pushed that diversity agenda. In terms of our board composition, we have one other female non-executive director in Nasima Sparks, who's absolutely brilliant. But I think Rod recognised that people are such a large part of property and relationships and client connections, and the asset management business being 400 strong in people, then to have the leader of that business representing her team at that table, I think was critical. Plus, again, I do like providing my insights and opinions on matters and input, etc. And certainly I have an interest in business, and hence I've done my MBA as well. So I guess it's kind of all worked out, and I do enjoy sitting at that table and debating really serious topics and making sure we've got the direction of Knight Frank where it needs to be.
And so you don't have any trouble getting your voice heard in that forum?
Yeah, well, look, no. I think it's always a matter of maybe your opinion or point of view might not also always be the one that's taken, but it's important to share it. We're quite a collaborative group, and we do share a lot of our opinions, and we've got representatives from each of the states, and even in terms of states wanting different things or having different issues that might be impacting them at a state level versus national, like that's all to be negotiated as a team. And the best teams are ones that can be honest and forthright with each other, but then still walk out of the room with a really solid pathway forward.
And so how do you, because not everybody can navigate those conversations effectively, I find. If disagreement doesn't have to be conflict, right? It's just trying to get to the best outcome. So how do you ensure that it is healthy debate, even when you're, you've got to sort of say, well, actually, we're not going your way. How do you navigate those conversations?
Yeah, and look, I think being a exec director, I have a business line that certainly I represent, but also I represent a company, and sometimes those the position or direction of your business line versus the company might not necessarily be aligned to what you'd otherwise represent as a business line. And certainly, I always consider it as hats. So you've got to kind of take one hat off and go, well, what's a company position? And whilst I might not like it for my service line, I've got to really challenge myself. So I think a lot of it's within us to challenge ourselves and our own viewpoint. Like you could be dogged and say, no, this is exactly what I want to do. Or you could listen and kind of find the point of view and try and understand the point of direction as well, and compromise with yourself. Or it might be your approach that's actually right, because you're thinking of total people, and everyone's like, actually, we didn't think of that. And so it can happen both ways. It's never a perfect, I guess, science. And you kind of think back and go, actually, I'm sure that there's been plenty of conversations we've had, but then we've all walked out of the room and the business is still in a really strong position, even despite the last 6 months, which have been challenging for all businesses. So we always kind of get there in the end. But I think you've got to have your point of view, and you've got to perhaps challenge yourself beforehand to raise it and go, actually, what point of view am I expressing? Is it the company one, or am I just focused on a service line? And again, that's a tricky balance to strike as a kind of exec director, so someone that's in the business functionally as well as on the board.
Yeah, it's so important. One of the first things I learned when I became a franchisor was how many different perspectives there were. Nobody was right and nobody was wrong, but everybody just looked at things in different ways. And so I really had to challenge myself to be able to, as you say, put somebody else's hat on. And if I was an agent in the eastern suburbs, how would I be feeling about what I'm trying to do at corporate? It's a really important thing for everybody to learn.
Yeah, and I agree. And I'm not sort of kind of over glossing over it or making it seem like it's perfect every time. It can be challenging, but you've got to kind of then challenge yourself to learn from it and figure out how you navigate it, which I'm sure you have. And try and, again, if you can walk away from the discussion, all parties, including your franchisee partner or franchisee network, that's a good outcome.
Yeah, totally. Now you mentioned you did your MBA. Now you did your MBA in various parts of the world, right? You did an international MBA, is that right?
Yeah, I did. So Sydney University runs a global executive MBA program, and I love study and I love learning. And and I love traveling as well, so that all kind of married. But this MBA program, at the time, they accepted 20 people into the program.
Wow.
And I think there's usually about 200 plus applicants. So I was very, very fortunate to get into the program. And what they seek to do is provide you insight, and a global insight, because we are a global economy, and hence the placements in various universities around the world. And I was, again, given technology disruption, differing business models is kind of critical to business. That was really the focus areas of the MBA, as much as core business strategy, etc. So yes, my MBA took me around the world, to the US, Israel, India, UK. It was a fantastic experience.
That's
and really
phenomenal.
eye-opening, and plus the alumni network it opens up. But
Yeah.
talk about something that changes your perspective when you really come back. And Knight Frank being a global real estate company, and CBRE sort of being one before I joined Knight Frank, I think it's so important to have a global mindset. And again, when things open back up, certainly, or even now, we're still sort of connecting virtually with our counterparts across different countries. And
Sure.
it's important to learn from other countries. And it's sort of like, I guess, you learning from understanding different states and the way they're operating even now. It's the same with internationally, different countries operate in different conditions with different requirements, different laws. So getting some insight into some of the businesses that we work with in that period was just completely eye-opening.
Yeah, it would have been fantastic. My MBA only took me to Parramatta, so it wasn't quite the same, really. I'm so jealous of your experience. It's almost worth going back and doing it all over again, to be able to do it globally. That would be incredible. Where was your favourite placement?
UCLA in LA was a fantastic placement, and I think just because of the access to some of the lecturers that we were coached by. So we had Keith Chan, who is the I guess brain behind Uber and the algorithm that sits behind Uber, coming to coach us on multi-sided market strategies. And it was just, it just kind of blows your mind how intelligent these operators are, and the platforms that they've built. And of course, everyone knows Uber. So to get kind of a direct insight into, Keith Chan and, 20 of us sitting in a room understanding how they built Uber, experiences like that, they just don't come very often. And it's probably actually an experience for, even in India, we were staying at, we're hosted by a university called IIM, but actually in India, it was really about finding a challenge and then building a business model that solves that challenge, and, applying design thinking principles. But of course, in India, there's so many challenges. And on our course, we actually had a gentleman that runs a social enterprise in India about providing, education and teaching, I guess, kids in, parts of India that are pretty low socioeconomically successful, I suppose, and pretty challenged. So, see him providing technology that actually teaches them English to give them a better chance of employment or, success. It just really grounds you, I think, as well. And you really appreciate your life here in Australia, but then the opportunity to study a course like that.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I remember when you and I spoke on one of the webinars that we did for commercial real estate, you said that you, Knight Frank, were expecting a Black Swan event. And so because you prepared your clients for that, a lot of them were not in as difficult a position as they may have found themselves in during the pandemic. Can you just explain to me why you were expecting a Black Swan event? What is the kind of research that you guys do to predict things like that?
Look, I think it was more so our teams, look at research and speculate on property markets, internationally and in Australia. And it was our head of capital markets across Asia Pac that was presenting to our client base here in Sydney. I think it was about October, November last year. And there was such an interest and weight of capital coming into Australia in terms of, purchasing property, and that was across office or industrial logistics. And then he was actually talking about possible events that might occur. And it was like, okay, well, we've had a really good run in the property industry for, the last few years. And everyone had been calling 5 minutes to midnight because we use the property clock as a terminology. And then we were saying in last September, it almost reset. So it had gone to 5 minutes to midnight to quarter to midnight. But then they were speculating whether there would be a Black Swan. And that's something obviously unanticipated that hits the market and impacts things. So I suppose what some companies in the property industry did and was probably more so reduce their leverage, so the debt that they had against some property, and some, not all. So, like some properties groups run different strategies, but certainly some of our institutional groups, you'll see they might operate at anywhere between 40 and 50% leverage, maybe even more. But they were really bringing down their kind of capital or their exposure to debt, really just to prepare. And I think that's because, you don't necessarily anticipate a pandemic. I don't think anyone would, but you anticipate something, and it's about how risk averse you want to make your portfolio. And I think that's probably more the point, as opposed to kind of going, we anticipated a pandemic no one could have. It was more so there has to be something coming, something resets that property clock. But even now, I would say that I know that there's this question about return to work and the utilisation of offices, which is a very current, matter.
Yeah.
But certainly I think, who knows when things will return to a normal in terms of we're not dealing with a pandemic because there's a vaccine or whatever else. People will, or occupants and users of cities will use cities differently. And now that we've demonstrated that work from home, can work. And I think that's been a change in mindset. But I think there'll still be a use for commercial office. And even now we're seeing such strong interest, even with the properties that Frank have listed over the last couple of weeks. There's huge interest still, and, interest from offshore groups. And there does still seem to be capital available. And certainly even in industrial logistics, there's, it's, under a surge of huge popularity. So I think property certainly always has a use case. Granted, it will always have its challenged environments, and depending on an owner's strategy for dealing with or anticipating those events, like again reducing debt, or making sure they have longer term leases on foot, or looking at the tenant mix in properties to reduce their risk profiles. So again, you may now look at travel related industries and say, do I want to have that much exposure to that tenant in my commercial property, etc. Yeah. I think these kind of events really reset people's thinking, again, depending on how risk averse or not an owner may be. So I think we knew something was coming because, again, we had a pretty good run.
Yes.
But again, it's kind of now like, let's reset and see where the opportunity is, because there always is opportunity in property, as even commercial or residential. These markets move around, and sometimes you'll see Perth having a really good run and Sydney not so much, and vice versa. But now, even in residential property, this move to kind of actually we can work from home anywhere. So let's look at more regional areas or anything in the Southern Highlands right now. Or
yeah, totally. Do you think that any of the commercial buildings in the city will convert to residential?
Look, I think that's never off the table. And I only say that in terms of looking at studies of cities and trying to not make cities ghost towns. So, being so concentrated with commercial that on weekends they're empty. And that's been a challenge across a lot of cities. I still remember this debate occurring when I was in London. I think mixed use precincts should actually be, an opportunity for future development, and the Central Sydney Planning Strategy looks at even increased heights and floor plates for certain precincts and blocks around the city. So I think we're still yet to see how our city may change. Again, I think in terms of residential at the moment in cities, I know unit sales aren't necessarily having a great run. So again, you've got to then try and anticipate where you might be in the next cycle to understand when you might kick off either asset conversion or a redevelopment, etc. Yeah. So I would never say never. I think the cities mixed-use cities are always the most vibrant cities, and that could be, again, commercial, hotels, residential, and we're seeing some fantastic developments in Melbourne come out of the ground and reach PC that actually do incorporate those three use cases or three uses.
Awesome. Okay, we've been chatting for half an hour. Do you even believe it?
We can always chat for hours, Leanne, you and I.
Absolutely, there's no doubt about that. Before we go, though, I want to just ask you if you've got any tips about having those courageous conversations, those difficult conversations that you sometimes have to have with yourself or with team members or clients that you rather avoid, but you really have to actually have. You got any tips?
Look, rule number one for me, be honest, and be honest with yourself. So if it's a difficult conversation across a matter with a client, I'm always just honest. And I think that's what really holds you in good stead and builds trust and faith, and really focus on client service, but ultimately building a relationship. So honesty at all times. I that's really my motto.
Yeah.
And then when you're having those courageous conversations, be honest with yourself as well, because again, similar to what I was saying about taking one hat off and another hat on to really understand different perspectives, be honest with yourself about that, to say, okay, am I just trying to express my opinion, or is it the right opinion? And am I listening to other parties' points of view as well? So I love a courageous conversation. I think they're absolutely critical to pushing forward agendas and progress in general. But honesty is always my number one policy. Number two is integrity too.
Yeah, really good advice. And I think being honest with yourself is incredibly important, because we do kid ourselves sometimes, don't we? We really do, let's be honest.
Yeah, and you should be your best friend. You're just going to be honest with yourself.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, thank you so much. I know how busy your schedule is, so I really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, and I will look forward to seeing you again very soon.
Well, thank you for the invite, Leanne. Good to see you.
My pleasure. Talk soon.
All right, see ya.